Hello, I am Lucille Isadora Therese. I am the spiritual director of the Order of the Mystical Christ and the Sophia Wisdom Centers. I'm so excited to offer this Lenten program to you this year. This program has only been available to our mystical students in our centers across the country until this year. I wanted to open it wide so that more people could experience the profound capacity of a mystical approach to Lent and how it might transform your lives. In this presentation, you'll get an idea of an outline of what Lent is from a mystical perspective and some of the metaphysical principles that are associated with Lent. You'll also get some practical tools on how to approach Lent from a mystical perspective with 3 practices. You're welcome to use this video on its own or to sign up for the Lenten program through our website that will walk you through day by day each of these practices. In the program itself, you'll also receive daily meditations 3 times a day that will help you focus on each of these practices and actually make them real in your life. This is an incredible opportunity to harness this power of mysticism and also receive the guidance and direction needed to really be able to focus your practice in a way that's most likely to produce a lot of change and transformation during this season. No matter how you approach this, I hope that it becomes a blessing for you and deepens your experience of this incredible season. Okay, so let's get started. The season of Lent, an introduction to a mystical approach to the Lenten season. What is Lent? Lent is the 40 days between Ash Wednesday and Palm Sunday, but we usually include the 7 days between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday when we use the term in general. Why 40 days? The number 4 represents earth and physical substance. 40 is an exponential form of 4. It is 10 times 4. It represents the ultimate completion of earth patterns and is used in the Old and New Testament to represent super completion of a change in an earth pattern. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews wandered the wilderness for 40 years before finding their promised land. After 40 years, they found and settled their homeland. This is a total completion of a physical journey. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness after his baptism. This represented Jesus' completion of the mastery of physical form, which include his egoic mind. Why do we celebrate at this time of year? We celebrate at this time of year because the cosmic and the solar patterns reflect the resurrection. The Lenten season falls at this time of year because the astral and cosmic patterns are ideal for supporting a process of death and rebirth. When we raise up lower vibrational parts of ourselves, those parts experience a death and then find that they are reborn to a form that is more free, expansive, and joyful. It is not truly a death, just as Jesus' death wasn't truly a death. It is instead a transformation of lower vibrations into higher vibrations. But it does feel like a death. And in order to have new life, we must be willing to move through the feelings of fear and the instinct to preserve all parts of ourselves as they are. Astrologically, Lent marks the passage of the sun from the sign Pisces into Aries. Aries is a sign of new beginnings and dynamic change. Life is kindled in Aries, driven by the creative power of life, of the life force pushing ever upward into manifestation. Where the dynamic, courageous, and powerful energies that were locked inside during the winter season burst forth with incredible urgency. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac and represents the archetype of fire. Here the sun, which was hidden in the darkness of winter, shows its first outward effect as spring begins a visible resurrection of nature from the apparent death of winter. What was dormant within now becomes outwardly apparent. What does it mean to have a mystical approach to Lent? It means to seek out an experiential understanding of the spiritual and cosmic process of this season, to look inward to see the reflection of Jesus and Mary's path within ourselves, to actively engage in the transformational power of the symbols and energies of the season, and to grow in devotion and love for the gifts of our Masters Jesus and Mary. We seek to harness the symbolic power of the season, the symbolic power of death and resurrection. Death is inevitable, but it can be stalled or embraced. If death is stalled, it becomes infertile. If death is supported, it leads to life. The transformation of death into new life requires warmth. Warmth comes from the fire of God, which is within our own being. One way to imagine this is that stalling death is like refrigerating rotting produce. The produce no longer can offer vitality because it's already begun to rot, but it cannot continue into its process of death and fertility via being composted and returning to the earth without warmth. In order to transform, fire must be embraced, contained, and quenched. What appears to be destructive leads to new life. Fire speeds up the process of taking down one form and letting the energy be released to create new forms of life. This is also true for spiritual fire. Burning alive. The fact is, we are already burning when things are beginning to die in us. The question is, will this burning lead to a sense of experiential heaven or experiential hell? The difference between the two is that when the spiritual fire is allowed to burn constructively, to break things down that are old and transform them into the energy and the substance of new life, we experience heaven. We experience growth, peace, evolution, development, and those things which satisfy our soul. When they're stalled, we end up experiencing that burning and that attempt to transform as stagnant and painful, and have the personal experience of a hell-like reality. So how do we focus this power and fire and death into the kind of new life that we seek? There are 3 practices that will most effectively channel this power in this season. The first practice is sacrifice. Sacrifice is freely offering something despite wishing to hold on to it at another level. There are 2 kinds of sacrifice. We can sacrifice those things which are already dying, but which we remain attached to. This action is essentially self-serving, and that's not a bad thing. It benefits our growth and it reduces our pain long term. It helps us and then helps others in subtle ways by supporting the pattern of transformation in the group consciousness, but it's primarily for our own development. The second kind of sacrifice is primarily for others. It's a gift we give in order to support the transformation of others. It has a secondary benefit of helping our own path, but it's primarily focused on service to others. We're going to be focusing primarily on the first kind in this series of practices. The second kind is more appropriate for advanced practitioners and those who have entered into service. So how to identify an effective form of sacrifice to encourage our growth? The sacrifices we make to encourage our own deaths and resurrection are more complicated because they need to be formulated well in order to be effective. To identify the most effective form of sacrifice, ask yourself these questions. What patterns, energies, or behaviors are not giving me life anymore? Which of these are withering but not bearing new life? What might I give up in daily life that would fuel and agitate these parts into the transformation that they desire? You can reflect on these questions and journal about them. If you're doing the Lenten program through our online studies, we will also provide guided meditations for the first 4 days of Lent that will support your discovery. You can also use the following common practices to get some ideas. Common forms of sacrifice. The first is fasting. Fasting is a form of sacrifice that we commonly use in our order during the Lenten period. Fasting means that we limit our consumption of food for a period of time. This has 3 major purposes. The first is to trigger a body-based fear, and by doing so, to discover that we are safe and totally okay when we don't eat for a day or a few days. This can help us release fears around not getting enough food or nourishment. The second is to learn to pay attention to more subtle and etheric forms of energy. The ingestion and processing of food takes up a lot of energy in our bodies and can distract us from the subtle energies in our bodies. Fasting can help us to attune to the subtle energies of soul and spirit within. 3. If we are already skilled at the first two via practice, we can use fasting as an energetic offering for the spiritual benefit of others. Common forms of fasting. Fasting can be complete, i.e. ingesting no calories and seeking no taste bud stimulation, like calorie-free diet soda. This means drinking only plain water for the entire period of the fast. Or liquid-only fasting, in which one consumes fluids, usually ones without significant amounts of protein but no solid food. Or it could be a partial fast, limiting the food we eat to things which give little or no pleasure. This is a good alternative for those who cannot safely complete other forms of fasting. It can take the form of a bread and water fast or a tasteless protein shake fast. There are other kinds of common sacrifice, which can include giving up a kind of food or beverage that you have a strong attachment to, for example, sugars, candy, soda, coffee, desserts, or salty snacks, whatever you're most attached to. Giving up the use of a category of technology that you have a strong attachment to, for example, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, television, movies, videos, or electronic games. Giving up an unhealthy habit or behavior, like smoking, drinking alcohol, or overusing caffeine. Or giving up a physical comfort, like sleeping in or taking naps. Whatever you choose, remember that the true purpose of the sacrifice is spiritual. Don't get distracted by the form of the sacrifice and end up losing sight of the true purpose. Instead, use the daily meditations to focus the energy of the discomfort towards the transformation that you seek. Make your sacrifice a sacred vow between you and God. Make sure that you're very clear about the exact nature and limits of your sacrifice, so there's no room for slipping or cheating. Remember that you have made a promise to God, and that promise will keep you focused and strong. It's really important to be clear about exactly what you're offering, because it's very tempting to kind of slip into slightly permitted variations of the thing that you're giving up. For example, if you're giving up sugar, to start using a lot of natural sugars, eating excessive amounts of fruit or fruit juice or condensed fruit juices that essentially are the same thing as the thing you're giving up. Decide exactly where that line is ahead of time so you're not tempted to push it during the Lenten season. The second practice is forgiveness. Resentments, anger, and fears that linger after being hurt, all forms of trapped energy. They can't provide new life by being consumed directly, and they can't die to fuel new life, like the fruit that we described earlier. Forgiveness is the releasing of oneself and or another from the bondage of myopic or incomplete personal justice into the truth of perfect cosmic justice. When we forgive another, we release the delusion that our hurt and anger can actually support the correction of that behavior. That's got a lot of layers, so you may want to reread or re-listen to that part and reflect on it to understand it deeply. Forgiving others. When we forgive others, we choose to rest in the trust that God, acting through their own soul, will teach them the full error of their ways and the consequences of their actions, and that God will move them forward towards corrective karmic action. And when I'm talking about God here, I'm talking about the God within through our own soul, not an external God that punishes or rewards behavior externally. This is toward freedom and balance. In order to be free of the bondages of resentment, anger, and fear, as it relates to being hurt, we must relinquish the following delusions: that we ever had the power to force another person to repent, that anything they could do would actually be capable of correcting the damage that was done. And this one's especially for deep hurts. Sometimes someone's action can correct a small wrongdoing or hurt, but when we have deep pain, ones that we have trouble forgiving, another person's action can never correct it. That there is any deficit, wounding, or harm that cannot be healed by God within us. When we focus externally and we become determined that something outside of us needs to fix the harm done, then we undermine the reality that God within us has the full capacity to do all healing. And lastly, that there could ever be a true injustice in the expansive reality of God. To forgive ourselves, we must honestly see and take responsibility for our own behavior without exaggerating or minimizing it. It's often tempting to do one of these two things. Either we exaggerate it and beat ourselves up continuously, or we minimize it in order to avoid the feeling of shame. So we must humbly accept that our understanding of the situation and its effects are incredibly limited. We can never really understand the full implications of our hurtful behavior. Sometimes it's a lot more significant than we imagined, and sometimes it's much less significant or actually has been used to be helpful for the other person. So we need to submit our own judgment of that behavior to God's judgment and relinquish all rights to determine our own punishment or penance. And again, when I'm talking about God's judgment, I'm talking about the perfect judgment of the cosmos, considering all factors and the limitations of each human being, the development of their soul, their connection in previous lives to the action in this life, where they are in their development, where you are in your development. And when I say punishment or penance, I'm talking about our own ideas of punishment and penance, that we want to punish ourselves and sort of forego the true and deeper consequence of our behavior cosmically. So I'm not suggesting that God is punishing. The last is take any corrective action that is suggested by God within and accept God's love for us and God's perfect care of the ones we have hurt. In this, we'll have to accept that we will continue to learn and grow, and we will strive never to repeat the harmful action. In order to do these things, we have to understand the perfect love and perfect justice of God in the cosmos. The universe is made of God. God is light, life, and love. God is perfectly balanced. Everyone is in a developmental process of growth. We all do harm to one another when we're ignorant to the truth of ourselves and our connection to each other and to God. We will all come to learn through the process of trial and error, or through love and grace. There can be no ultimate injustice because no soul can come to union with God without fully understanding its own errors, having grown out of them, and having created significant positive karmic effect in the world. In the big picture of soul development, there can be no injustice because in order to reach the ultimate reunion with God, we have to have not only karmically repaired or balanced our own actions, but we have to have actually produced a significant positive karmic effect. So no one is reaching the ultimate goal as a soul without having done this. We need to remember that every soul will get exactly what it needs to make that possible. But that's a big picture, and if we insist on the small picture, then we will perceive injustice and will be angry about it. The fact is that we suffer when we try to control the karmic process with nearsighted willfulness. We suffer because our egoic mind wishes to exert a nearsighted sense of justice on those who have hurt us. We seek to control their learning process. We believe that if we can control their behavior and their emotions, we can force them to correct the damage they have done. And this will never work in the big picture. The damage which has been done can only be repaired by your own willingness to be healed from within. Only God can truly compensate you for the things that you've lost. And when God within you compensates you, you will always receive more than you were owed. You will receive extra grace, love, and wisdom. And the same is true for anyone that you've hurt. When we forgive, we allow those things which are dead to give new life. Remember that when death is stalled, it becomes infertile. So, to forgive lets that death continue, break down the essential energies, and feed into new life through the fertile soil. How to work on forgiveness this season. We'll start by doing a retrospection of your life and look for places where you hurt others or were hurt by others. We'll notice lingering resentments, pain, fear, or anger. We'll make a list and work on each one of these during different weeks of Lent. If you're doing the program, that will be mapped out through meditations, reflections, and through worksheets. And we can use those guided meditations to support your process. The third practice is gratitude. Gratitude is a catalyst for the transformation of death into new life. It fills the spaces left by things we have released and fills them with fertilizer for new seeds. It breaks us out of constrained and constricted thinking and feeling patterns and expands our capacity to receive light, life, and love. This is really important because if we're not practicing gratitude and filling those spaces with gratitude, it's easy to unintentionally or unconsciously replace certain negative habits with similar other negative habits, to undo the work of our sacrifice by unconsciously soothing ourselves. Letting go of things leaves space, and gratitude is the perfect replacement, the perfect filler for those spaces, as it feeds the work and energizes it through the deep heart energy, the expansive joy and connection that gratitude provides. So a practical plan for a mystical Lenten season. One is watch this video. And you may need to watch it a few times to really feel each piece of it and understand why these pieces are important. You can ask any questions you have. If you're doing the process through our online course, there'll be a minister available to answer your questions and to help you focus your practice. That online program is through a program called Kajabi, and it is connected to our website. If you click on the online offerings and online courses, you'll see the course there. And that course will lead you through each step of the Lenten process, which includes the following: worksheets for choosing sacrifices and people to forgive, guided meditations 3 times daily, and new meditations for the morning each week. And in the evening, there'll be a shift halfway through between one form of focusing on healing and another. If you would like to sign up for the Lenten program, you can go to the website, which is sophiawisdom.org, and click on the online offerings and online programs, and then sign up for the Lenten program. I pray for each of you blessings as you enter this season consciously, and that it might be a powerful and deepening process of releasing and allowing new life, so that you can join in the power and the joy of the resurrection of the Christ consciousness at Easter. Blessings to each of you.